For over 40 years, Vince McMahon Jr. was the most powerful man in the professional wrestling business. As the owner and CEO of WWE, McMahon didn't really have to answer to anybody and helped create a huge empire, growing WWE from a regional territory to a global powerhouse worth billions. And for the vast majority of that ride, one man stood by his side, surviving all the odds to become the second most powerful person in the company, and by extension, the wrestling business as a whole. But just who was this man who fans rarely heard from and whose name provoked a strong reaction from those who did know him? Who is this man who had the power to torpedo a talent's career and had a say in a substantial portion of what fans watched on WWE television? Who is this man who, after 40 years in a prominent position, suddenly left WWE and hasn't really been heard from since? It's time to pull back the curtain on the mysterious, elusive, and divisive Kevin Dunn. Given the secretive nature of his private life, not much is known about Kevin Dunn's early years. Dunn was born in the early 1960s and grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. After a seemingly unremarkable childhood, he enrolled in the nearby Towson University in the late 1970s to do a bachelor's degree in business. He wouldn't graduate from that course, however, as a sharp twist of fate altered the course of his life forever. He was just 3 weeks shy of finishing a computer course to complete his undergraduate work when his father, Dennis Dunn, developed a brain tumor that required surgery. Dennis was losing his sight and needed his son around to help, so Dunn quit school to aid his dad. He would ultimately complete his bachelor's degree from Towson in 2011 after taking a similar course online. Dennis Dunn worked in television production, producing Baltimore Colts and Orioles games for both radio and television during the early 1970s, and having previously worked for the advertising agency W.B. Donor & Son. In 1960, he even helped produce presidential candidate John F. Kennedy's television campaign. Kevin Dunn used to act as something of a gopher, running tapes to television stations for his father while he learned some television production fundamentals from him. But in 1972, Dennis would be tapped by Vincent James McMahon to help with television production. As executive producer of Intermedia Productions, Dennis Dunn handled the WWF's syndication and program production out of Baltimore. In a story that has since grown to near mythic proportions, Dennis was once transporting television taping masters from Pennsylvania when his car caught on fire. Though he abandoned his burning vehicle, Dennis Dunn managed to snatch the tapes from inside it, saving them, and it's been said, McMahon's promotion from destruction. It's been claimed that after the would-be act of heroism, McMahon vowed that Dennis and his family would have jobs with his promotion for life. But with Dennis's health ailing, Vincent Kennedy McMahon, who had taken over from his father in 1982, called on Kevin to help out until Dennis returned. Dennis Dunn never did return to work for WWE, but his son Kevin would go from strength to strength over the course of the next few decades, rising through the ranks and eventually growing in stature to become viewed as the most valuable person in the organization, not named McMahon. Kevin was hired full-time by WWE in 1984 and worked as an associate producer for all domestic WWE programming between 1984 and 1987. In a rare public interview, he admitted to being initially overwhelmed by the size of the task at hand, but somehow got through it by essentially teaching himself on the job as he went. One of his first big early tasks was the inaugural WrestleMania, a landmark event which he was very much involved in the planning and production of. Just 2 years later, Dunn was the line producer for WrestleMania 3, a show that, for many, legitimized WWE during a crucial period in their national expansion. It was also in 1987 that Dunn relocated to Stamford, Connecticut, in order to head up WWE's new $10 million state-of-the-art TV studio. By no means a professional wrestling fan per se, Kevin Dunn emphasized the entertainment aspect of the genre and was a major advocate for spectacle and celebrity involvement on WWE broadcasts. It was during this period of rapid growth and expansion that WWE began dealing with mainstream networks, like MTV, who showed the first Slammy Awards in 1986, and NBC, who began airing Saturday Night's Main Event in 1985. Dunn began to gain more influence within the company during this era, getting promoted to more and more prestigious job titles when in 1993 he was made executive producer of all WWE programming. 1993 was the same year that WWE's flagship television show Monday Night Raw launched, with its debut episode premiering on January 11th, live on the USA Network. Having been in WWE for close to a decade at this point, Dunn, along with his production crew, had fine-tuned the art of live television production, and were considered not just industry leaders as far as professional wrestling was concerned, but among the best in television, period. And it was during the 90s that WWE fans began to see and hear from Kevin Dunn properly for the first time. They might not have known about it the first time, mind, when Dunn called into WWE Livewire early in the show's run in the fall of 1996, pretending to be a black fan called Bob, while asking Ahmed Johnson a question about racism. Nothing dodgy about that. Nope, nothing whatsoever. It was toward the end of the decade that fans who read pro wrestling newsletters, or so-called dirt sheets to many within the industry, began to hear about Kevin Dunn. For example, in the March 1st, 1999 edition of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, Dave Meltzer reported that there was talk of putting Jim Cornette on commentary on Sunday Night Heat alongside Shane McMahon, but that Cornette was in the political doghouse with both Dunn and WWE head writer Vince Russo. I'd call that one an understatement, personally. Dunn and Cornette had had issues with one another from the get-go. According to Cornette, Dunn looked down on him and others such as Paul Bearer and Jim Ross because he was from the South, came from a pro-wrestling background, and had a traditionalist way of thinking about the business. In Cornette's view, Dunn didn't like professional wrestling. Hell, he didn't even like the term professional wrestling, considering himself a television producer who happened to work in the field of sports entertainment. The two personalities clashed as they struggled to coexist, with things coming to a head at a production meeting in the days before a Raw taping in Nova Scotia in July of '97. Cornette took exception with creative that was planned for The Patriot on that particular episode, and attempted to steer the conversation toward the topic. Some of the others in the meeting, which was attended by Cornette, Dunn, Vince McMahon, Bruce Pritchard, Jim Ross, Vince Russo, and possibly others, were, according to the tennis racket aficionado, more concerned with discussing what he perceived as trivial matters, such as what t-shirt Sable was going to wear on the show. After another attempt by Cornette to bring things back to the subject of The Patriot, Kevin Dunn looked at the Kentuckian and said, "You know, Jim, I find you tiresome." And that is when something in Cornette snapped. Launching a foul-mouthed tirade towards the producer, Cornette made fun of Dunn's protruding Bucky Beaver front teeth and threatened him with physical harm before storming out of the meeting and retiring to his hotel room. Cornette's outburst earned him a creative meeting reprieve for the next several weeks, but he was forced to apologize to Dunn when both were at McMahon's house for a meeting. According to Cornette, Dunn broke down and cried during the apology, informing Cornette that the appearance of his distinctive teeth was a sensitive subject, as he used to get teased about them in school. Dunn and Cornette tolerated each other from then on, even if Cornette was scolded by Dunn for things he'd said during commentary. For example, when he referenced Billy Robinson and the Dynamite Kid during a match featuring Real Man's Man Steven Regal, Dunn lambasted him for it, claiming that nobody watching Raw would know who either Robinson or Dynamite were. On another occasion, Cornette was told off for comparing Edge and Christian to the Fabulous Freebirds for the same reason. But he didn't have time to sit around and worry about Jim Cornette. WWE were in the middle of the red-hot Attitude Era, and Dunn was a very busy man. He'd get busier in the summer of 1999 too, with the addition of another 2-hour television show, SmackDown, to his workload. In the August 24th edition of the New York Daily News, Dunn gave a rare interview where he discussed SmackDown and how it would be different from Raw. Per Dunn, the TV PG-rated show, as opposed to the TV-14 Raw, would have more lavish sets, slightly cleaner language, a concert-like light show stage, and plenty of pre-taped content to go along with the in-ring stuff taped on Tuesdays. Clearly, he would be very hands-on with the new show's look and feel. On October 19th of 1999, not long after SmackDown debuted, WWE went from being a private to a public company, and as a key member of the WWE team, Dunn received some very favorable stock options. For the next few decades, Dunn would continue to receive and cash in on WWE stock, making him a millionaire many, many times over. And McMahon continued to add to Dunn's workload in 2000 with the announcement of the forthcoming XFL. Like the World Bodybuilding Federation before it, the XFL would be another non-WWE production of McMahon's that would cross over, and which Dunn would be heavily involved in. As all this was going on, WWE business was on fire, and between Raw, SmackDown, the impending XFL launch, and everything else, Kevin Dunn was as busy as he'd ever been. But among it all came the news that his father, Dennis Dunn, had passed away. On the October 2nd, 2000 edition of Raw, WWE ran an in memory of graphic for Dennis Dunn, who had continued to work for WWE as a consultant up until his death. But there was no slowing down for Kevin, whose responsibilities and influence had greatly increased during the Attitude Era. When WWE bought their competition and purchased WCW on March 23, 2001, Dunn was given yet more work to do. While Jim Ross, as the head of WWE's talent relations department, negotiated with the on-screen talent that WWE wanted to bring over, Dunn was in charge of hiring production crew, television writers, and television announcers for a mooted reboot of WCW, which never actually ended up happening. In the middle of all this change, Dunn took some time away to be at home after his wife gave birth to a new baby in mid-June. Yes, Kevin Dunn is married and does have kids, plural, but it's no surprise that next to nothing is publicly known about them. But as far as the WCW reboot, one of the reasons why that never happened is because of the poor presentation and reception to the somewhat infamous Booker T vs. Buff Bagwell main event from the July 2nd, 2001 Raw. With Dunn not at work, there were issues producing the segment when it came to the announcers, since choosing them was one of Dunn's duties. When the time came to do the match, no final decision had been made, and the thrown-together duo of Arn Anderson and Scott Hudson were sent out ill-prepared for the broadcast. In any event, the upshot was the WCW reboot was off, and the invasion of WCW and ECW forces uniting against WWE was on. Kevin Dunn would play a fairly significant role in the invasion storyline, which is often referred to as the most bungled storyline in wrestling history, even if fans weren't aware of it as it was unfolding. According to multiple reports, Dunn was steadfast in his belief that those coming over from WCW should not be presented as being in any way better than established WWE stars. In Dunn's estimation, they had spent years building the WWE brand, and that should be protected at all costs, especially when they'd fought so hard to win the Monday Night War. The man with the all-important final say, Vince McMahon, evidently agreed with Dunn's reasoning, and the alliance were never booked to look like a genuine threat to WWE. Hell, on several occasions, major WCW stars, most notably Diamond Dallas Page, were crushed and made to look like total jobbers by their WWE counterparts. It was in the summer of 2001 that fans got their first proper look at the mysterious Kevin Dunn. He had appeared here and there on WWE programming in the past, but only in brief snippets. Content to stay in his production truck, Dunn had little interest in appearing on camera and was, by all accounts, self-conscious about his appearance. But when the reality competition show Tough Enough debuted on MTV on June 21st, Kevin Dunn was all over it. While that may seem strange on the surface given his aversion to screen time, Tough Enough was considered a pet project of Dunn's, and his opinion when it came to WWE talent held plenty of weight with his boss. Looking back, it's fascinating to watch the show now and see Dunn evaluating talent and giving his opinions during meetings. In one infamous moment during the casting for Season 2, Dunn ripped on 22-year-old John Hennigan while claiming that the auditioning hopeful was patronizing the WWE crew before passing on him. Hennigan would not only make the cut in Season 3, but was co-winner of the competition and went on to have a very successful career as Johnny Everything, really. In the last episode before the Season 2 finale, the remaining 4 Tough Enough contestants had one-on-one interviews with Dunn, which was played up as a major deal due to Dunn's standing within the company. And it was Dunn who, after those interviews, decided to have 2 female winners for Season 2, selecting Linda Miles and Jackie Gader, when it was widely understood that there was supposed to be 1 female and 1 male winner. That may have been the expectation, but Kevin Dunn and Vince McMahon pretty much wrote the rulebook when it came to this sort of thing, and Dunn himself had a very particular idea of what a WWE superstar should look and act like. For Dunn, aesthetics were incredibly important, and having the right look was paramount. Indeed, Dunn had a lot to do with the glut of talent that was recruited and called up during the 2000s that were, in the case of the men, tall and incredibly jacked up, and in the case of at least some of the women, plucked directly from the pages of a magazine. While the likes of Jim Ross favored genuine athletes or those with industry experience, Dunn and McMahon wanted bigger and more beautiful bodies for their television show. If you were a trusted 10-year veteran waiting to get promoted from Ohio Valley Wrestling to either Raw or SmackDown in this era, odds were you'd have to get in line behind the glamour model who had been in the business for 15 minutes. And as far as WWE's overall creative direction, Dunn certainly had influence there in this era too. Dunn, who made a brief on-camera appearance when Red Brand general manager Eric Bischoff burst into his production truck on the August 12, 2002 episode of Raw, was reported to be behind the move to incorporate more soap opera elements into WWE programming around that time. And by soap opera elements, we mean stuff like the storyline where Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman claimed The Undertaker had cheated on his pregnant wife, as well as the lamentable saga of Katie Vick. When the mainstream media predictably lambasted WWE for the content of the Katie Vick storyline, Dunn was compelled to defend it via a press release, saying, "This was an attempt at dark humor, capitalizing on the popularity of programs such as CSI, 6 Feet Under, and The X-Files. I don't remember Fox Mulder shagging a mannequin in a funeral home, but it could have happened, I suppose." Dunn was quoted again a couple of months later in an article for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, correctly predicting to a reporter that a racy segment between Tori Wilson and Dawn Marie on that night's SmackDown taping would be the second highest rated of the show. It was reported around this time that Dunn was clashing with Paul Heyman, who was demoted from his SmackDown head writer position in February of 2003. One of the things they disagreed on, for example, were the lie, cheat, and steal vignettes made for Los Guerreros. The vignettes were Dunn's idea, and Heyman had expected them to portray Eddie and Chavo in a Mexican setting, similar to vignettes Eddie and Conan had done in WCW. However, they instead portrayed Los Guerreros as pickpockets in Beverly Hills, much to Heyman's chagrin. It should also be noted that Eddie himself had complained to Vince McMahon about the issue, but the vignettes aired anyway. Over on Raw, meanwhile, Dunn shot down the notion of bringing in former WCW announcer Tony Schiavone that April, and also openly praised the backstage segment where Goldust put a wig on Goldberg's head, claiming that it gave the Goldberg character more dimension. Personally, I'd say it was demented, but we all have opinions, don't we? It was around this time that it was reported Dunn was pushing for more backstage stuff on WWE programming, including promos and sketches. Jim Cornette's assertion that Dunn didn't actually like the wrestling part of wrestling was proving to be more true as time went on. Like just about everyone in WWE, Dunn really only had to please an audience of one, and he was clearly doing that since in July of 2003, Dunn was promoted to Executive Vice President of Television Production. In filings, it was revealed that Dunn earned $497,917 in salary and $5,500 in other compensation. He continued to shape the WWE product and come up with new ideas, one of which was sending camera crews on the road to film house shows so they could show clips of them on television and make them seem more important, and thus, in theory, increase ticket sales for non-televised events. Dunn's next really big idea, however, was the WWE Diva Search, a tough enough style competition guaranteeing one woman a WWE contract worth $250,000 for 1 year at least. The competition was announced by Vince McMahon on the May 24, 2004 edition of Raw. A bunch of female talent left WWE in 2004, either getting released or walking of their own accord, including Jazz, Gail Kim, Jacqueline, Nydia, Sable, and Terry Runnels. The Diva Search was Dunn's way to get fresh female faces on WWE television, lack of talent or experience be damned. In an Associated Press story on the Diva Search that July, Dunn was quoted as saying, "It's easy to go lowbrow. That's not where we're going with our product in general or this search. We'll be fighting our image for 50 years because there's 50 years of tradition before us, and we understand that." It's hard to not raise an eyebrow at a quote like that, considering some of the content not just on WWE TV, but during the first Diva Search specifically, including the controversial Diss the Diva segment from the August 30th episode of Raw, which was an insult and expletive-laden piece of business that was cut from the version of the show broadcast by Sky Sports in the UK on the grounds of taste. Off-screen, there was some controversy surrounding Dunn and the Diva Search too. The Santa Monica-based Pushing the Lope Entertainment, along with John Piermarini and Frank Murgia, claimed that they were going to file suit against WWE because they came up with the Diva Search idea first. The group claimed that they, along with Trish Stratus, presented the idea to Dunn, who loved it, with Piermarini initially meeting with WWE's EVP of television production on December 8, 2003, before he, Murgia, and Trish Stratus formally presented on January 7th. The group were told that Vince McMahon was impressed with the idea, but didn't want to commit until after WrestleMania 20. They didn't hear anything more from WWE and assumed the idea was a non-starter until they read on May 24th that WWE were going ahead with the Diva Search. Pushing the Lope claimed to have written and verbal proof that Dunn agreed to send a letter of intent on behalf of WWE to be partners with Piermarini and Murgia, but the WWE ignored their calls and messages before forging ahead themselves. It doesn't appear that much, if anything, came from the lawsuit threat. Besides, WWE themselves had run a competition called the WWE Diva Search, which wasn't televised but was determined via fan voting and had a finale that was broadcast online via WWE web show Bite This. As an aside, Piermarini would join WWE in July of 2009 and worked for the company as writer and producer until October of 2010, which included dealing directly with Dunn and his production department. Meanwhile, Dunn's pay packet, like his influence with McMahon, continued to swell, and it was reported in 2004 that he was paid $517,692 in salary, along with a further $300,000 in bonuses. With stock options and other earnings, however, Dunn actually made $1,286,337 for the year. By that point a WWE employee for 2 decades, Dunn was not just a made man as far as his position in the hierarchy was concerned, he was also very much a WWE company man and was fiercely protective of their brand. In the run-up to the first ECW One Night Stand pay-per-view, for example, Dunn and McMahon felt as though it was important to establish that ECW was a WWE-owned entity, rather than an outside show that happened to be using WWE contracted talent. Not only was ECW presented on WWE television as a trivial group that presented mostly weapons-based brawls from a bingo hall in Philadelphia, the storyline showed that McMahon was the money behind ECW all along. That summer, Dunn once again leapt to the defense of WWE when speaking about the notorious terrorist angle involving Muhammad Hassan and The Undertaker from the July 7th episode of SmackDown. Speaking with the New York Post, Dunn was quoted as saying, "We're very proud of our product. We try and be sensitive with everything we portray, but there's got to be protagonists and antagonists on our TV shows. We just happen to reflect the politics of the world sometimes, especially with these Arab American characters. We are firmly in the entertainment business." He then suggested that the angle, which aired the same day as the London bombings, should have been taken tongue-in-cheek. When he wasn't defending the indefensible, Dunn was typically busy on the road producing television or otherwise producing content, such as DVD releases at WWE's studio in Stamford, while overseeing a staff of over 130 people. That November, he took over from Thomas Barreca as the point man when it came to negotiating for tape libraries, with WWE looking to acquire the archives of defunct promotions such as World Class Championship Wrestling. Dunn was also in negotiations around this time to bring in UFC's Mike Goldberg to replace Jim Ross as Raw's lead announcer. Dunn and Ross may have been fellow football fanatics and two of Vince's most trusted confidants, but Dunn, and McMahon for that matter, had long wanted to replace Ross, who they felt was too old, too southern, and had too much of a pro-wrestling style to be one of the faces and voices of their flagship show. The negotiations with Goldberg proved unsuccessful, however, as he didn't want to leave UFC, while neither Jonathan Coachman or Joey Styles turned out to be the answer to this JR conundrum, with the Man in Black returning to the booth around 6 months later. In the summer of 2006, Dunn was hands-on producing yet another WWE show, this time the relaunched ECW. While I'm sure Paul Heyman and others would have wanted a grittier feel similar to the original ECW, Dunn believed that ECW, as a WWE production, couldn't fall too far below WWE's standards, and took over the producing duties. His changes included moving the July 4th ECW television taping from the ECW Arena in Philly to the much bigger Wachovia Center, now known as the Wells Fargo Arena, and replacing ECW original ring announcer Steven DeAngelis, who Dunn claimed had an annoying voice, with Justin Roberts. Atlas Security was axed too, as Dunn felt they got in the way of WWE's cameramen. Dunn continued to clash with Heyman too. Heyman felt as though ECW should be recorded at standalone tapings rather than being taped alongside SmackDown. Dunn, on the other hand, successfully argued against it, citing increased costs and the need to renegotiate with his production crew for another day of work. Kevin Dunn was on vacation and thus not in attendance at the August 1st, 2006 ECW television taping at the Hammerstein Ballroom, where the New York fans completely turned on the misguided main event, pitting ECW champion Big Show against Batista. He did manage to make sure that subsequent international airings of the show had the boos edited out and all references to the hostile fans scrubbed from commentary mind, giving an insight into how tightly he controlled WWE programming. When ECW's ratings kept falling in the months that followed, Dunn blamed not the substandard quality of the show itself for the decline, but suggested that the real reason was because fans didn't realize ECW was in fact a WWE brand, before pushing the idea that they should remove the ECW logo on screen and replace it with the WWE one. Another WWE production that Kevin Dunn was heavily involved in was the WWE Hall of Fame. And in 2007, Dunn called Jerry Lawler and let him know that he would be inducted in that year's class. The King wasn't exactly thrilled with the news, since he believed that the Hall of Fame was an honor that should come when you're old and fully retired. Dunn duly informed Lawler that he was, in fact, old, before asking Jerry who he wanted to induct him. Lawler immediately suggested Lance Russell, the iconic Memphis wrestling announcer who had witnessed many of the King's greatest matches and moments. That idea was shot down by Dunn, who talked Lawler out of wanting Russell. Instead, Dunn got William Shatner, who had participated in one segment with Lawler on Raw over a decade prior. Not only that, but one of Dunn's production assistants wrote Shatner's speech for him. Such incidents only serve to highlight Dunn's mindset that the WWE brand should come before everything else and demonstrates his disregard of wider wrestling history. WWE was all Kevin Dunn had ever known, so if it didn't happen there, it's like it didn't happen at all. In Dunn's mind, the WWE audience would feel the exact same way. Dunn's decision to go with William Shatner as Lawler's inductor also shows how important celebrity involvement and endorsement was to him, and how much he felt it benefited WWE to include famous faces. In April of 2007, WWE, in a move spearheaded by Dunn, opened a new office in Santa Monica, whose function was to get more celebrities involved with WWE while simultaneously working to land WWE stars' roles in films, television shows, and commercials. This was after the success of stuff like John Cena's angle with Kevin Federline and the Donald Trump and Vince McMahon feud and subsequent WrestleMania match. So if you're wondering who may have been a big proponent of Raw's oft-pilloried guest host era, look no further than one Mr. Kevin Dunn. As if there was any doubt to the power that he wielded within WWE, on August 7th, 2008, Kevin Dunn was added to WWE's board of directors. Over the next several years, that power manifested in Dunn's frequent decision to cut time from the actual wrestling on WWE broadcasts if they were running long, in favor of showing the video packages his own production team had worked on, as well as Dunn having the pushes of WWE stars slowed or altogether stopped. Sheamus, for example, was moved down the card after his initial foray into the main event, in large part because Kevin Dunn wasn't a fan of his. One of the reasons may have been the Celtic Warrior's Irish accent, since Dunn would level the same criticism at Becky Lynch years later. Behind the scenes, the perception of Dunn among many who had to work with him was that he was a talented producer, but that he could be condescending, if not downright rude, to his production crew and WWE talent. It was also suggested that Dunn's bad moods may have been a reflection on Vince's own moods on any given day, as McMahon tended to take it out on his right-hand man if he was mad about something. McMahon may have lashed out at Dunn from time to time, but they still shared many of the same views when it came to the WWE product, as well as a similar sense in humor. According to reports, the gruesome twosome thought the line Vince fed Michael Cole about Jerry Lawler suffering from anal bleeding after being attacked by Mark Henry was the funniest thing in the world, and were thrilled to bits when it trended on Twitter. Dunn was also said to be the one person who, more than anyone, knew how to interface with McMahon and roll with the constantly changing direction of WWE TV. Kevin Dunn and Vince McMahon were thick as thieves, and as long as Vince was around, Dunn had a job with WWE. But there was another McMahon who was not so high on the EVP of TV production, namely Vince's daughter Stephanie. In the summer of 2011, it was reported that there was an internal power struggle going on between the two after Stephanie took over running WWE.com, a sign of Stephanie's growing influence within the company that many expected her to inherit. Another sign that Dunn's influence may have been lessening was when WWE Chief Marketing Officer Michelle Wilson was put in charge of the company's WWE Network project. But Dunn did come up with some original 30-minute show concepts for the network which Vince McMahon reportedly loved. However, Stephanie McMahon and her husband Paul Triple H Levesque had their own long-term vision for the company, and were supposedly intent on bringing in their own person to run the production side of things down the line. Dunn was close to Stephanie's brother Shane, mind, and in the run-up to WrestleMania 28 in 2012, Dunn was involved in conversations when Shane pitched to come back and head up WWE Creative, an idea that was eventually shot down. Of course, as long as Vince was around, Dunn was safe, but his position suddenly looked somewhat tenuous. Dunn himself supposedly conceded to people in private that he knew a battle with Stephanie was one that he was not going to win in the end. Another sign that things were going to be different for Dunn came when some of his allies in production were let go. That was especially true of childhood friend John Garberick, who was hired in the early 2000s as a producer and notably worked on Tough Enough, where he was dubbed Big. Dunn may have been preoccupied with the shifting political climate backstage, but he still had a job to do. That job, it was increasingly observed, led to a style of WWE programming characterized by quick camera cuts and the dreaded shaky cam. It was off-putting to some fans, who were vocal in their belief that it detracted from the action in-ring. Dunn also made his feelings known about specific talents during this era, and it was reported that his opinions of the likes of Adam Rose and Billy Kay had a lot to do with their reduced roles on television and eventual releases from the company. Conversely, those that Dunn took a shine to, such as Alicia Fox, tended to stick around and remain featured over a long period of time. Several talents have spoken out about Dunn during this time, most notably Jon Moxley, formerly known as Dean Ambrose, in his autobiography Mox. The former Shield member did not mince his words when expressing his disdain for Dunn, pointing to a particular incident that soured Moxley on him. After winning the United States Championship at Extreme Rules 2013, the Lunatic Fringe was caught up in the moment and mouthed a curse word while asking for the referee to give him the title belt. Dunn pulled him up on this after the fact and asked Moxley to apologize, which he did, assuring Dunn that it would never happen again. However, by the time of the next television taping, Dunn had judged Moxley's apology to be insufficient and demanded that he say sorry once again not only to him, but to the entire production truck. If Dunn's influence was waning in the face of the McMahon-Levesque threat, his earning power certainly wasn't. In 2016, Dunn earned a not inconsiderable $4,758,170. Again, it should be noted that Dunn's position as an executive awarded him some very generous stock options, and that he was able to make tens of millions of dollars by selling his stock over the years. But did Kevin Dunn really earn that money? In the eyes of some fans, particularly those with motion sickness, probably not. Dunn, rightly or wrongly, had become known as an enemy of professional wrestling fans who loved and wanted to see professional wrestling, a man whose ADD style was a detriment to the viewing experience. But Dunn was, for all his apparent faults, a professional who ran a tight ship, had contributed greatly to WWE in myriad ways over the years, and knew how to deliver when they were up against it. And WWE were certainly up against it when the COVID-19 pandemic pretty much shut the world down in March of 2020. But the threat of a deadly and rapidly spreading virus was not enough to shut down the sports entertainment juggernaut, who committed to continue producing hours of original televised programming every single week during the pandemic, as well as premium live events. After initially filming in the sterilized WWE Performance Center, Dunn helped create the Thunderdome, a biosecure venue in Florida where WWE shows would be filmed between August of 2020 and July of 2021. In an interview with Synopsis Media in November of 2020, Dunn spoke about the creation of the Thunderdome and how it forced him and his production team to innovate and do things they had never done before in reimagining WWE's production from the ground up. A month after that interview, many within WWE were reportedly disturbed to see a Trump 2020 Keep America Great flag taped to the side of a production truck that was led by Dunn. Though it couldn't be confirmed that Dunn himself had physically put the flag there, reports indicated that Dunn had made no secret of his political affiliations, and that this was a clear political message at a time when Donald Trump was contesting the 2020 election results. For what it's worth, it was said that Vince McMahon would not approve of the flag being posted on the truck, despite his own friendship with Trump. What few, if any, could have foreseen at the time is that Vince McMahon's days in his own company were numbered. On July 22, 2022, Vince McMahon tweeted, "At 77, time for me to retire. Thank you WWE Universe. Then, now, forever, together. Hashtag thankful, hashtag WWE." This bombshell announcement, appearing as it did in such a flippant forum, came after McMahon had voluntarily stepped down as WWE CEO following the publication of a Wall Street Journal article that accused McMahon of making hush money payments worth millions to former employees he'd had affairs with. That saga would, as we know, take many more twists and turns, and is in fact still ongoing at the time of recording of this video. As for Kevin Dunn and his future, things suddenly looked very different indeed. Speculation ran rampant that Dunn, as well as Bruce Pritchard, could soon be following Vince McMahon out the door. That speculation was not quelled when Dunn missed the 2022 Survivor Series to take a vacation. Dunn taking a vacation was not necessarily newsworthy. He worked hard, but still took days off and went on holidays, but the fact that he missed a pay-per-view was something of a story. Dunn's absence was a topic of discussion backstage at the show, with one theory being that Dunn missed the show due to his objection to the War Games theme. War Games, of course, was a WCW concept, and something that Vince McMahon had rejected doing in the past due to his well-known suspicion of things that were created in the sports entertainment world outside of WWE. Dunn held that same suspicion, but Paul Levesque, who had lobbied for War Games in the past and trialed it while overseeing NXT, was a noted fan and took his opportunity to finally present it on the main roster show. Production director Brian Fadum ran the truck at Survivor Series in Dunn's absence. Dunn stuck around, however, and when the company was officially sold to Endeavor in a joint deal with the UFC to create TKO in September of 2023, he received a $7 million bonus. 3 months later, Kevin Dunn would, after almost 40 years of working there, depart WWE for good. Then aged 61, WWE's executive producer and chief of global television distribution retired on December 31st, 2023. It was Dunn's own decision to leave, having become frustrated since the sale of the company when Endeavor wanted to make budget cuts in order to improve profitability in his department, and began making production decisions without seeking Dunn's opinion or approval. Even though Dunn's departure had been expected, really, since Vince McMahon first stepped down in July of 2022, it was still a shock to people within the company that it happened how and when it did. On January 1st, 2024, WWE President Nick Khan sent a memo to WWE staff thanking Dunn for his contributions since joining the company in 1984, noting that he would always be part of the WWE family. Reports on Dunn's resignation mentioned that WWE had tried to convince him to stay through the Royal Rumble pay-per-view, but that Dunn preferred a clean break. After an age of being able to do what he wanted when he wanted to do it, Dunn wasn't about to stick around and be dictated to. On January 9th, 2024, WWE announced that Lee Fitting, who had previously worked with ESPN, would be joining the company as their new head of media and production. Since Kevin Dunn has left WWE, the presentation of the company's televised product has changed significantly, from less frequent camera cuts to longer individual camera shots to non-English speaking talent being pushed stronger and beyond. Many of these changes have been lauded by fans, and there's no doubt WWE television feels different today than it did for the past however many years when Kevin Dunn ruled autonomously. And as for Kevin Dunn himself, he has unsurprisingly been quiet since calling it a day. Outside of a debunked rumor that he would be joining a Vince McMahon-led production company focused on film and television content, his name has not been mentioned much at all. With tens of millions in the bank and no need to work now that he's approaching his mid-60s, it's probable that the very private Kevin Dunn is content to live a quiet, normal life and enjoy the fruits of his labor. Love him or hate him, and there seem to be plenty who do hate him, Kevin Dunn certainly left his mark on the professional wrestling industry, for better or worse, and you cannot tell the story of WWE without talking about him. And after talking about him now for the last 45 or so minutes, I have a feeling that there's a lot more that could be said, and that, really, we'll never truly know the man behind the curtain.